Well, good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 12:48 a.m. I'm James Kuzno coming to you from the studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Yes, it is day one. It is day one of Donald Trump's tariff that have been put in place against Canada, Mexico, and China. Tonight on this show, we're going to focus more on the Canada, US, and Mexico trade tariffs and how that impacts not only our economy, but going forward, how it's going to impact inflation and other aspects of society. Now, of course, we know that the first and most immediate impact, or biggest impact, is going to be the price that we pay at the till. As you take yourself to the cash register, whether it's in the grocery store, whether it's at the car dealership, or elsewhere, chances are prices are going to be higher. That goes to say not only in Canada, not only in Mexico, but in the US. For some strange reason, the US government and Donald Trump continue to try to convince people that tariffs are paid by the foreign nation. That is not the fact. The fact is that tariffs are paid by the nation importing the goods as a way to try to encourage more goods being manufactured and assembled in the US and less of it being imported. Now, the problem here is that there are many goods that just are not available to be manufactured in the United States of America. As such, there is little choice to import all of these items going forward long term as they have for decades. Now, of course, they can ramp up manufacturing in the United States, but let's take a look at some of the facts here. You're going to have to build new factories, new systems, new molds, new items and manufacturing processes to make that happen. New infrastructure, new roads, new buildings, new firefighters for the growth in your commercial space, and on it goes. Now, of course, if you are encouraging the manufacturing in the United States and you've got a period of time that it's going to take in order to get these factories built and online, once again, you are stuck paying the tariffs until then. There are things that practically will not make any sense, even with the tariffs being implemented, to import, whether that's Canada, Mexico, or the US. There are things that you are not going to look at manufacturing or developing in your own nation. There's also going to be the fact that from Mexico's standpoint, they are imposing tariffs on vegetables and fruits and other things as well. Now, of course, you cannot grow that much in the US to make up for that market loss in the immediate future. Once again, is it practical? Are you going to have people to actually work at these manufacturing facilities and to make sure that things go as planned? Now, when you look at the labor costs in foreign nations, when you look at energy costs in foreign nations, they cannot begin to compete with them. The U.S. cannot compete with those markets. When you look at what they're getting paid in factories for manufacturing in China or in Bangladesh or the Philippines, it is a large difference than what they're paying in the U.S. Excuse me. Now, when you take that into account, those are things that are going to, again, have to be imported. You are not going to evade or avoid any of the tariffs that way. And even for the goods that are manufactured in the United States, where are they getting all of the raw goods and raw minerals and materials that are going to be needed to manufacture in the U.S.? Again, those will have to be imported, subjected to the tariffs. Now, let's take a look here at more of an in-depth area or look at the tariffs, because that is the generalized overview that it's going to cost all of us more. And we'll actually get into some numbers as well. Now, as that continues, we know that the tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico of plus an additional 10% tariffs on China are starting today. And Canada has retaliated with 25% tariffs Excuse me, folks. Sorry about that. On about $155 billion, that's Canadian dollars, which equals to about 115 billion US worth of goods, while Mexico has ordered retaliatory tariffs, but the specifics are a bit less clear there. It's going to happen in stages. Canada initially is going to be looking at, I believe it's around 35%. 35 billion in tariffs. It could be more than that very quickly, as this is a fluid situation and things are changing rapidly. But again, the tariffs are now in place in Canada, the US, and an additional 10% on China, which brings them up to 20%. Now, Canada, as I said, is retaliating with tariffs on U.S. goods, while Mexico has also ordered retaliatory tariffs. And again, we don't know what those specifically are, but Mexico also states that they are going to implement non-tariff responses as well. So we'll have to wait and see. We're expecting more information about that from Claudia Sheinbaum today and over the next several days as she lays out in more detail her plan to the international community. Now, research suggests that the tariffs could reduce the U.S. GDP by $200 billion from Canada and Mexico from those tariffs, and $55 billion from China, with U.S. and Mexico potentially facing GDP shrinks of 3.6% and 2% respectively. Now, this does not take into account the boycotts that are going on against against American goods in Canada, and we'll look at Canada alone when it comes to tourism. A drop in tourism for the United States from Canadian travelers, which is their single most profitable or revenue generating country for tourism. Again, a lot of Canadians go across the border, drive across because we live in close proximity. They do shopping, they visit people, friends, family, all of that. And of course, they travel for vacation to places like Hawaii, Vegas, Disneyland, Disney World, all these different places. Now, recently, some of the Canadian border crossings are reporting reductions in traffic over the previous long weekend in comparison to last year, reduced numbers in 30 to 40% at those rates. So that's a huge impact. But let's take into this point is that even if the U.S. saw just a 20% reduction in tourism, on top of the tariff issues, just the tourism alone would hit them at over $20 billion a year in reduction. So that is a massive, massive hit as well. So the U.S. is going to have to be prepared for that. Now, the evidence that we see is leaning towards increased inflation and trade disruptions for all three nations, with complex economic impacts still unfolding. Now, with that said, we do expect that over the next year, this could increase the inflation rate in the U.S. by 4% or greater. And this is actually quite the opposite as to what Trump is claiming that he wants to achieve in the U.S. economy. He says he wants to lower prices and he wants to get rid of inflation. But realistically, he also claims that there would have been absolutely no inflation had he have been in office the last 4 years instead of Biden, which is complete bullshit because we know that the inflation issue has impacted the entire world, and there is no way that the U.S. president could have impacted or reduced that number to zero worldwide. It's just a ridiculous claim, but again, we are used to that from Donald Trump. Now, U.S. tariffs and retaliatory actions, as I said, are starting today, March the 4th, 2025. The U.S. has implemented the 25% tariffs on all imports from Canada and Mexico, and as I said, added 10% on Chinese imports, bringing the total of 20% tariffs for China. This follows a month-long delay for Canada and Mexico, and it is just continuing to get ridiculous in terms of the U.S. government policy right now and the way that the administration is handling international trade, international relations, international political realms, and so forth. It is just so out of touch with where the world needs to be going and going backwards instead of forwards. It is dividing instead of uniting. And that is a sad day in politics and in the world as a whole. Now, we need to also look at Canada announcing the tariffs on a wide range of U.S. goods valued at about $155 billion, affecting sectors like food, appliances, clothing, and more. Mexico has also ordered retaliatory tariffs, but again, we don't know exactly what those are going to look like. We'll probably have a better idea today and in the coming days as they are implemented. Now, the financial impacts are significant and multifaceted for the U.S. The tariffs could generate about $215.5 billion in additional revenue from Canadian and Mexican imports. But research suggests a $200 billion GDP reduction from these tariffs and a $55 billion hit from China, potentially pushing inflation to 4% annually. Canada might see its GDP shrink by 3.6%, with growth projections dropping to 0.4% in 2025 from 1.4%. Mexico could face a 2% GDP contraction while facing inflationary pressures due to higher import costs. These estimates highlight a broad economic ripple effect, including disrupted supply chains and potential job losses, especially in the export sector, and those are the export-dependent sectors. Now, this is just a sad state once again that it has come to this. Canada, US, Mexico had the North American Free Trade Agreement, and then that was taken out by Trump in his last term. He renegotiated with the US-Canada-Mexico agreement, which now is also pretty much thrown out the window. There's also an interesting fact that as a part of international trade agreements, the way it works is that you are, as a member of the Economic Forum and other international agencies, you're not supposed to impose tariffs at different levels for different countries. If you are imposing an import tariff on a certain product, let's say automobiles, at 10%, you're supposed to keep that 10% across the board. For all nations that are exporting into the U.S. Now, this is also nullified when it comes to free trade agreements. You can have the free trade agreements, and you can also have special exceptions to the tariff rules, but overall, that's the generalized rule. So to hit China with 10% tariffs and now an additional 10, bringing them up to 20, Canada with across-the-board 25% tariff, I mean, it is just ridiculous that Donald Trump is throwing out decades and decades of negotiated trade agreements, international trade policy, international trade restrictions, and they are all out the window as of this time. Now, the tariff implementation under President Donald Trump, again, has imposed the 25% tariff, and that's effective today, following the 1 month delay that they had imposed earlier, and now that's expired, of course. Now, he claims that it is an attempt to try to cut down on the illegal immigration entering the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. But at the end of the day, let's face the facts, the numbers of people entering into the U.S. are actually quite low in comparison to historic highs or historic averages. So that is definitely not the issue. He also claims that it's about border security. Well, given the number of troops that are along the U.S.-Mexico border, where he sees that real big risk, as well as improved security along the Canadian-U.S. border, it really is mind-boggling in the fact that he thinks that this is still got to be resolved. Now, let's face it the other way. The U.S. has an obligation and the reason why they have the Border Security Service or Homeland Security is to stop fentanyl from getting across their borders, to be able to weed out the illicit drug flow into the U.S. shipping terminals, into the U.S. airports, across the land borders, and so forth. Now, because of the fact that they have increased the security so high at the borders, that has dropped down on the land borders, but it doesn't stop the flow coming in from shipping containers from other nations on other continents. This is an important fact because he blames Canada and Mexico for the U.S. drug problem, although it is up to the U.S. government to stop the flow into the country, just as it is for Canada to stop the flow into Canada of illegal substances and narcotics coming in from the U.S. or from abroad via shipping containers and other means of transportation. So again, to state that this is the lying factors behind the tariffs, it just doesn't make any sense, and it is obviously just a smokescreen for what Donald Trump is trying to do. Now, at the end of the day, if you look at the revenue in which Donald Trump thinks that these tariffs are going to bring in for the U.S., that money is coming out of the pockets of the retail spending. That is coming out of the pockets of everyday Americans, just as the tariffs here in Canada are going to cost Canadian consumers and vice versa. You can also look at that on the same par course for Mexico. It's going to cost the U.S. more to import items from Mexico. And again, the U.S. imports a lot more than Canada does. So there's the trade deficit there. So they have a lot more to lose. When you factor in the non-tariff impacts, so things such as tourism, buying Canadian initiatives or buying Mexican initiatives or boycotting U.S. brands by different nations, that is going to have a much bigger impact on the U.S. economy than the tariffs themselves or by themselves. As I said, just the tourism industry alone at a 20% reduction could impact the U.S. economy by over $20 billion a year. Take into account that right now some of the borders between Canada and the U.S. are actually reporting reductions of 30 to 40% of traffic crossing the border into the U.S. That is money that is not being spent in those border towns by Canadians, which again is a very substantial amount, especially to the businesses that border Canada, as well as U.S. travel destinations. So again, it's going to bring a major impact to the U.S., to Canada, and to Mexico. Now, we have been talking about this for some time because we know that Trump has been making these threats of tariffs for as long as he started campaigning, that he just, comes up with an idea and goes with it. No matter how wrong it is for the American people, he is not going to stand up and say, oh, we're changing course because I was wrong. That is never the case. We have to find a way in which we can deal with these tariffs and try to find a way forward to remove tariffs or reduce them, while also ensuring that we feed Donald Trump's giant ego. And that's what it's all about. He cannot be embarrassed. He cannot be shamed. He has to have his ego stroked at every corner. And that is the problem with the dictator, and that is where it's heading. Donald Trump seems to think that he has the ability to control the world, and that is not the case. He is instead alienating all of the allies and siding with Putin and others in nations such as North Korea and Iran, and the list goes on. And today he went as far as calling out Taiwan and separating the U.S. from Taiwan, which is again another ally. And that can have very catastrophic results, considering that he's buddying up to all of these dictators who are not friends of the United States. They may be able to buy Donald Trump and make him cooperate with them through, I can only list a dozen or 24 different ways in which that Donald Trump potentially could be in the pocket of the oligarchs of China, of Russia, of Iran, and on and on. And let's face it, there's absolutely no ethical standards that Donald Trump won't throw away. And that would be even to sell out his own mother or to sell her ashes if he thought there was a profit in it. This is the first time I've ever seen a U.S. president who every day I open my email and it's constantly bombarded with all of these beggar emails that, oh, Elon Musk said your name, donate more money to find out more. You've been chosen for this award and a gold card. Send more money to Donald Trump so that you can get your little signed autograph picture of Donald Trump. I mean, it is just pathetic, the amount of crap that he's trying to hawk day in and day out through email. It drives me nuts. I could unsubscribe, but again, then I can't keep up on the news that he's putting out as well. So I want to keep track of this stuff. And the corruption just beyond, how he's trying to short markets or, trying to manipulate different markets in terms of cryptocurrency, in terms of real currency. I mean, it's just disgusting. And I can't believe that people are continuing to fall for Donald Trump's bullshit. But again, let's get back to trade tariffs because I got off on a rant there. Now, Mexico, on the other hand, has ordered retaliatory tariffs. Again, the terms are unclear, but Sheinbaum has instructed her economic minister to implement tariff and non-tariff measures, potentially mirroring Canada's approach, but without detailed targets or rates, adding as well that there is right now certain exemptions on the auto industry and certain parts of agriculture. So again, there's certain areas that won't be touched by these across-the-board tariffs by the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. But again, anything is on the table. Yesterday, Doug Ford, or in the last few days, Doug Ford, the Premier of the province of Ontario, said with a mischievous smile that should he be forced to turn off the electricity to America because they import vast amounts of energy from Canada, including the power to turn on your lights, he said that he will flick that switch with a big smile on his face. Again, Canada is not backing down, and we won't back down, just as we won't back down to Trump's demands of Canada becoming the 51st state. It will never happen. We are a proud and sovereign nation, and we will remain that way, and we will not be bullied by some orange-faced idiot that thinks he rules the world. And then there's also Musk, but we won't even get into that really tariffs. One of the targets that Canada is eyeballing for tariffs are all Tesla vehicles. And that is to hit Elon Musk as well in his pocketbook, as Canada is a massive EV market for Tesla, especially in the West Coast and in the Toronto region. Those are very large markets for Tesla that may be disappearing. A car lot on Vancouver Island was posting a used Tesla for sale, a used Cybertruck. And the dealership got lambasted with all kinds of comments on social media, just really putting them down for selling Elon Musk, any Elon Musk product, especially the Cybertruck. And it shows just how polarizing this issue has become in Canada, but also south of the border of the U.S. down to Mexico and in other nations. The EU has seen a massive reduction in the sale of Teslas as well. This is something that could impact Elon Musk, but let's face it, he's already digging his fingers into the pockets of every American by sabotaging some, my opinion anyway, sabotaging some trade contracts and procurement contracts with other companies that are competitors to Elon Musk's group of companies. And of course, once he sabotages those, the contracts filter down to Elon Musk. Now, once he sabotaged them, whether or not those numbers are even going to stay the same, or if he's going to be inflating all of those contracts, is also a massive concern and should be. Now, take that a step further, that a lot of loss will also come in the form of Canada and Mexico under free trade agreement also opened up their different bidding processes and procurement processes for government contracts, whether it's goods or services, to U.S.-based companies. A lot of the provincial and other regional governments, municipal governments, a lot of them across Canada are now withdrawing any opportunity for US-based companies to bid on these contracts. That, again, is going to have a major impact on the US economy and US companies and US workers, unfortunately. that are outside the realm of even the impacts of the tariffs. So I think that there is a lot bigger impact on Canada, on Mexico, and on the US that people are not realizing, especially those in the US. When you look at the fact, as I explained earlier, that you're not supposed to under under international trade agreements and restrictions and regulations that were agreed to over decades of negotiations between nations, you're not supposed to be dictating one tariff level for one country and one for another. It's supposed to be across the board general tariff rates. So if you're charging $10 for a grommet importing from China, you're supposed to charge the same 10% tariff to, or $10 whatever, the tariff to Canada, to Brazil, to anybody else. So again, the tariffs are supposed to be universal with few exceptions, but there are some exceptions. And again, that is a system that's been negotiated over so many decades that he's just thrown them all out the window. When you look at this, the direct costs of approximately $96.75 billion from Canada and $118.75 billion from Mexico are the direct costs to the U.S. economy, totaling about $215.5 billion in additional revenue for the U.S. coming out of the pockets of U.S. consumers. Keep that in mind, because you think you're getting any tax breaks when he is just jacking up what you're paying for your consumer items. That money has to come from somewhere, and it's coming out of the working person's pockets. Because let's face it, the rich already know how to avoid paying those taxes. As I said earlier, conversely, Canada's 25% tariffs on $326 billion of U.S. exports could cost the U.S. exporters an additional $81.5 billion. And with similar potential impacts from Mexico, though, we don't have exact figures and breakdowns from Mexico as of yet. We do expect to have those soon. Now, the financial impacts are expected to be substantial, with economic analysis providing estimates across all three nations. For the U.S., the Committee of Responsible Federal Budget estimated that a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, alongside 10% on China, could raise $1.3 trillion through 2035. But net economic impacts are negative. So that means it's going to cost the U.S. It's not going to bring in any profits or any benefit to the United States. It's going to actually have the opposite effect. And this is what happened back in the day of the Great Depression. It just seems to be lost on certain politicians today, or others who just have lost their balls and don't have the balls to stand up to Trump and try to pull out the crayon box to be able to speak in Trump language to draw out a map as to where he is taking this through the trade war. It doesn't win for anybody. It's not a winner for Canada. It's not a winner for Mexico. And it sure as hell is not a winner for the United States or Americans as a whole. It is just a loser for everybody. And it's going to cost the economy, it's going to cost jobs, and it's going to cost a lot more down the road. Because now, of course, nations around the world have concerns about whether or not the U.S. will stick to any trade agreement, and whether any trade agreement is going to be worth the paper it's written on. This going forward is going to be a major stumbling block to encourage foreign investment into the United States, because they've destabilized the ability of confidence, or the level of confidence, through international investors. Now, when you take into account the changes and the will of Donald Trump day by day, that does not secure confidence for foreign investment in the trillions of dollar range. Could be lost as a result of the breach of agreements and to where these trade wars are taking us. He likes to claim about these hundreds of billions of dollars that are going to be brought in through AI development and different companies such as Apple and, microchips and everything else. But the reality is that, again, there's just no way that they can compete in the market to have the manufacturing costs that they currently enjoy in India or China in the US, especially when you look at the potential of labor unions or just the standard living wages or let's face it, a lot of people aren't even making a living wage. So again, that's going to impact the price of every consumer good that gets transferred to the US for manufacturing. It also will have an impact on technology and the advancements, because a lot of countries share technological advances and development and co-development, code research, and it is going to impact all of that. It's going to slow the U.S. economy in terms of development, of advancements, and we're going to see more of that coming out of China, out of India, out of Brazil, out of Germany, and the European Union. Again, it is just going on and on when we look at how these tariffs are going to impact. Now, of course, it also has had a major impact on bilateral relations outside of the economy. It is really polarizing both the Canadian and the U.S. general public. And it's also polarizing people and attitudes in Mexico, in Europe. It is really a widespread issue. People are going to be trying to avoid supporting the U.S. economy on a massive level. Again, outside of the tariffs, that is going to be bad news for America, for the American workers, whether it's blue collar, whether it is people working minimum wage trying to make it through, it's going to get tougher. Regardless as to the lies and the bullshit that Donald Trump is feeding people, this is a big no-win situation for Canada, for the US, for Mexico, for Europe, for China. It is just going to be bad all the way around. And again, it is going to have major implications going forward. As I said, the U.S. GDP impact is anticipated to be around $200 billion, and Canada, Mexico at about $55 billion, and then also China at $200 billion with Canada, Mexico, and $55 billion from China. Inflation impact, you're looking at about 4% impact on inflation in the U.S. annually. And it's mostly going to impact directly for tariffs, consumer goods, autos, and electronics. But again, the U.S. is looking at blanket tariffs across everything. And that's going to have major job employment and economic impacts on Canada. How bad is that going to be? Well, we're anticipating across the country impact of about a 3.6% shrink in the economy. And as per inflation impact, that has yet to be worked out and brought forward. Canada is looking to hit back on food, appliances, energy, and autos. And again, Doug Ford in Ontario has said that he will have a big smile on his face if he's forced to turn the electricity off to the U.S. Now, in terms of Mexico, the impact once again is estimated to be about a 2% shrink in their GDP or their overall economy. And they are, again, not releasing any predictions or specifics on how that's going to impact their inflation annually. At this time, they're looking at agriculture, electronics, produce, and other items. But again, we're expecting either later today or over the coming days to get a clearer idea as to what the tariffs are going to look like in terms of the retaliatory tariffs from Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. So again, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Now, this is marking a significant escalation in North America. And again, it is throwing decades of trade negotiations and agreements out the window. But it also is going to have a massive geopolitical impact as well. And that is outside of Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. It's, again, going to impact geopolitical relations worldwide. Financial impacts are, just going to be negative. It's going to be a loser for all of us, for every nation involved here, with reduced GDP growth, increased inflation, and disrupted supply chains affecting all parties. And we didn't even touch on that yet, the impacts on the supply chain issues. When we look at this situation, as I said earlier, it remains fluid. It's going to be changing, and that's going to be happening, very rapidly as we move forward with this trade war. And don't fool yourself, that's exactly what it is. Now, when you take into account, all of this information, it is a sad day for North American trade relations and international trade relations, in a sad day for geopolitical relations and international and domestic relations, because there's going to be a lot of, again, polarized attitudes and polarization between communities on how this is working and how it is not benefiting, or some people who think it is benefiting. So again, we'll have to watch and see how it plays out, but this is day one of the trade tariff introduction by Donald Trump and retaliatory tariffs by Canada and Mexico. Thank you again for tuning in to Live Chat with James. This is ProPix TV Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget that you can add your comments to the comment section on the live program or on the rebroadcast on all of our platforms and make your comments heard. You can also give us story suggestions. Is this Toronto? No, it's not Toronto. This is, sorry, I'll go through. I got so wrapped up there going through everything. I forgot to say hello to some people such as Christian Morissette, Denise Manchester, Martin Como. Who else do we got on here? Carmine, Gradito719, welcome. User with a bunch of numbers, welcome. What is that? Vicenzu, welcome. This is Toronto, and I am in Vancouver. That's awesome. I was actually born in Toronto. I love Toronto. Hope to get back there this summer. So you never know. Maybe I'll do a live chat episode from the CN Tower or something when I'm in Toronto, or maybe at Union Station. We'll have to see how it plays out. Canadian guy Chris, welcome. We are actually just wrapping up, everybody. So again, if you have suggestions for topics that you want to talk about, or stories that you would like me to research and bring onto the show, by all means, put them in the comment section. Even on the rebroadcast on YouTube and other platforms, put it in the comment section. I do read them, and I like to keep informed as well as to interact with with all of the viewers, because hey, without you, the show wouldn't happen. And I love it when you bring your story ideas, because it brings you in as a part of the show, and we can all learn together or just chat together. Once again, this is James Kuzno from the ProPix TV Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe, everyone.